So, this happened a little while back now. I can't exactly remember how long at this point. It was one of those incidents that really make you question, well, the paranormal, I guess you could call it, if you believe in that sort of thing. It was a pretty typical day from what I remember. Mom was downstairs, closed off in her room, and my brother and I were upstairs locked in a pretty intense game of chess. Not really having anyone in the house at that moment, making noise was perfect for a game like it. We went back and forth, making our moves, when all of a sudden down the hallway to my left,
Daddy?
leading to my room no less, I could have swore I heard a little girl's voice say "Daddy" in an asking manner. Caught me off guard. Clear as day, too, not the kind of thing where you just think maybe you heard something. I decided to ignore it. Don't stir the pot and all, you know. I was thinking over my next move when I noticed out of my top peripheral that my brother was giving me a pretty odd stare. I looked up at him to acknowledge that he was staring me down when the thought came to me that maybe it was related to that voice I just heard. After an awkward silence, I finally asked him, "Did you hear it too?" Without me telling him what I heard first, he responded with a little girl's voice saying "Daddy." That sent a bit of shiver down my spine. We decided to investigate a little bit, seeing the occurrence of it and all. We checked to see if any of the neighboring kids were playing outside, and they weren't. Not that I think we really could have heard them that close and clear if they were from where we were on the second floor. And with no TVs or radios on it, and it definitely not being our mom's voice, all we could do was chalk it up to being something we couldn't explain. We decided to just go back to our chess game and just leave it be. I do respect skeptics of any ghost-type things, I guess you could say. But things like this really do make you wonder, don't they? This particular event happened a few years back now during a trip my family and I took to West Virginia to see some of our extended family. A good portion of our family lived there, so it was always nice to visit. It would be our grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, you name it. We would always meet and stay at my grandparents' house, which stood quite literally right across the street from the now closed West Virginia State Penitentiary. We'll come back to that. The stories I could tell you about the things my grandparents saw back in the day when the prison was still open, but that's for another time. The prison now runs tours to show people what the prison was like back in the day. Stories of specific prisoners, weapons found in beds, even some of the paintings that the prisoners would do in their spare time, you name it. Now, the penitentiary is supposedly one of the most haunted places in the country. As such, they also allowed for late-night ghost tours where guests could free roam the prison at night if they were interested in trying to catch something. I'm a pretty firm believer in the paranormal myself, so of course I was more than down to do the ghost tour. I convinced my brother and cousin to join me for the tour, much to both of their dismay and disapproval. Being so close, we simply waited till the tour time and just walked over when we needed to. It was a pretty simple introduction. The tour guide gave us a quick tour of the prison as well as areas off limits to the regular tour, which got us excited. And after a brief rundown of some safety measures, we were allowed to venture out and were left to our own devices. Our first bit of time was spent doing a preliminary walkthrough of the place, the infirmary, boiler room, courtyard, and, of course, the hanging barn. Taking photos and videos as we went, of course. We didn't seem to find anything much to my disappointment, other than, of course, the pitch-black darkness of a decrepit prison, which in itself is plenty creepy enough. We eventually came to a stop in the maximum security wing of the prison. We were only allowed access to certain cells on the bottom floor of this area, including the cell belonging to one of the most notorious criminals in the prison, who only went by the name of Red, and who ordered the death of many of the other inmates. The upper cells were locked off and impossible to get to due to the metal fencing practically closing the area off from the mess tables we now sat at in the area. But while we were sitting there, we started hearing what sounded like footsteps walking above us on the upper catwalk by the closed-off cells. heavy steps, like boots on metal make. We all shined our flashlights in the direction of the noise, and even though we couldn't see anyone, oddly enough, we could still follow the sound of the footsteps with our lights as it moved closer to the stairs that led down to the lower cells, down to the area we sat at. My cousin at this point made it very clear she was ready to go and was done with all of this. And as she finished speaking, the sudden sound of feet running down those steps at a full pace sent us running from that room and back to the lobby. The whole area was fenced off and shut by heavy chains, and we saw nothing accompanying the footsteps, so it couldn't have been a prank. We quickly left and walked back to our grandparents' house. My cousin was pretty shaken at this point, and my brother seemed very irritated by the whole thing and the fact I convinced him to go along with it all. We chose to not really discuss what happened and went about our night. Like I said, I'm a pretty firm believer in the paranormal, and I love the idea of experiencing and catching stuff like this. But even I'll admit, this may have been a bit more than even I was looking for. We all know the saying of how curiosity killed the cat. Mix that with trying to look for the paranormal and you're probably just asking for trouble. I was hanging out one night with my brother, my brother's girlfriend, and one of my best friends, who we'll just call Dan, Samantha, and Adam respectively for this story. We became really bored and decided we wanted to go out and do something exciting. I had read not too long ago before this night about an old area of town that was apparently prone to paranormal activity. It consisted of a rail line that ran parallel to an old well and cemetery that were both moved for railway construction. Despite all of the forums about the place telling us and everyone else to stay away, we decided to go check the place out, maybe against our better judgment. After mentally prepping ourselves during the drive there, we reached the turnoff and parked our car. None of us were old enough at the time to carry firearms for protection, so Adam brought some knives from his job that we could use if need be. We began by walking down the tracks that ran parallel to the wooded area. We all had our phones out, of course, trying to do the whole ghost hunter thing. After walking down the tracks for a few minutes, though, up ahead we noticed someone standing on the tracks. A storage unit complex to the left of us was giving off a faint orange glow from one of the area lights that seemed to silhouette the man. But even then, we could tell from the head and shoulder height of the silhouette that this man was huge. Maybe as tall, if not taller, as Adam, who stands at 6'5". We decided to turn around in case it was someone who meant us harm, not even considering the possibility of a ghost, but maybe just a vagrant who wished us ill will. As we started walking back, we noticed the silhouette started to follow. We picked up pace until we reached the car to turn around only to see that the silhouette was gone entirely. We were fairly spooked at this point, but decided we couldn't leave until we at least saw the old well and burial site. We started walking through the path through the woods, and quickly Samantha noted, "There's something in the woods walking next to us." My brother held her close, and eventually we reached the opening in the field. We weren't there a few seconds before suddenly that large silhouette seemed to almost appear right in front of me, like a shadow image staring at me with what looked like bright yellow cat eyes, as I suddenly felt a massive pressure on my chest. I told everyone to run, and we got back to the car. But like idiots in the panic, we had dropped Adam's knives that he needed for work. Dan and Samantha stayed in the car while Adam and I ran back to retrieve the knives. We made it to the field and found the knives. I found mine first and stood up to look at Adam. As he stood, he noticed I was staring past him. As I saw the silhouette once again appear behind him, he knew what I was seeing, and in shock we both ran to the car. Dan jumped in the driver's seat and began to drive away, but there's one more bit to this story, unfortunately. I asked Dan to stop since I wanted one more recording. I reached over Sam and Dan to stick my arm out the window with my recorder. Suddenly, at the same time, Dan says, "I'm really uncomfortable. I don't want to be here anymore." And he almost sat on top of Sam, trying to get away from the window. On the way back, I listened to that recording, and right as my brother spoke, there was a deep, almost laugh-like sound none of us heard ourselves. We never went back, and hardly speak of this story anymore entirely. Like I said, sometimes it's better for the cat to not be overly curious.